The call came on a Tuesday morning, while I was drinking my second cup of coffee on the back porch and watching the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel it would never catch. My phone buzzed against the wooden table, and I picked it up without looking at the screen because I assumed it was my brother, Gerald, calling to talk about the fishing trip we'd been planning for weeks. It wasn't Gerald. It was my daughter-in-law. "The honeymoon package gets canceled by midnight tonight," she said, before I could even say hello. "The deposit you put on the card is going to be forfeited unless the balance clears. Did you transfer the rest of it? Because we haven't seen it." I sat very still for a moment. The coffee mug was warm in my hand. The neighbor's dog was still barking somewhere down the yard. I said, slowly, "What honeymoon package?" There was a pause on her end. A short one, but I caught it. "Ours," she said. "Mine and your son's. We got married on Saturday. I figured he told you." I set the mug down carefully on the table so I wouldn't drop it. My son had gotten married 4 days ago, and no one had said a single word to me about it. Not an invitation. Not a phone call. Not a text message. And now, before I even had time to process what I was hearing, my new daughter-in-law was calling to ask me about money. That was the moment I understood something I should have understood years earlier. I had spent my whole life building things, a business, a reputation, a future for my family. And somewhere along the way, I had made a mistake so fundamental that it took a stranger's phone call on a Tuesday morning to make me finally see it clearly. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start on that Tuesday. It starts about 30 years earlier, when I was a young man with calloused hands and a second-hand truck, hauling materials for contractors across 3 counties. I built my freight business from nothing. 1 truck became 2, 2 became 5, 5 became a small fleet. By the time my son was born, I had 16 drivers working for me, a warehouse on the edge of town, and a modest portfolio of rental properties I'd picked up over the years when the prices were right. I wasn't a rich man, not by any real definition of the word, but I was comfortable. More than comfortable. I had worked every day of my adult life to make sure my family never had to worry. My wife passed when my son was 11. That was the hardest thing I have ever survived, and I won't pretend otherwise. After she was gone, I made every mistake a grieving father can make. I overcompensated. I gave my son everything I thought might fill the space she left behind. New sneakers when he asked. Even when the pair he had were barely broken in. Money for school trips. Money for clothes. Money for a car when he turned 16. Money for a better car when he wrecked the first one. I told myself it was love. It was love, in a way. But it was also guilt and fear and the particular blindness that comes from not wanting to look too closely at what you're creating. My son grew up knowing that if he ever ran short, I would cover it. That if anything broke, I would fix it. That if anything got complicated, I would simplify it for him. He grew up believing, in some deep unexamined part of himself, that the world was a place that bent itself to accommodate him. And I was the one who taught him that. He was 33 years old when he married my daughter-in-law. He had worked sporadically over the years, a few months at a logistics company, a brief stint doing something in marketing that he could never quite explain clearly, a stretch managing one of my rental properties that ended when 2 tenants moved out and he couldn't be bothered to find replacements. Each time something didn't work out, he came back to me. Each time, I helped him. I told myself that's what fathers do. I see now that's not entirely true. He had been living in one of my rental units for 4 years, a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood that had gotten nicer as the years went on. I charged him a token amount, less than a quarter of the market rate, and even that he paid late more often than not. His girlfriend, my daughter-in-law now, had moved in about 18 months before the phone call. She came from money, or so she implied. Her family had a big house out west. Her father had done well in commercial real estate. Her mother drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary. She talked about all of this frequently. I noticed, early on, that none of that money ever seemed to flow in their direction. She was charming when she wanted to be. That's the word I kept using, in my head, during the first year I knew her. Charming. She remembered my coffee order. She laughed at my old stories. She called me by a nickname my wife used to use, which should have made me uneasy but somehow made me feel welcome instead. I see all of it differently now. What I mistook for warmth was inventory. She was taking stock of what I had and calculating how much of it she could reach. I had co-signed a car loan for them 8 months before the wedding. $42,000 for a car my son picked out and my daughter-in-law drove. I had floated their rent several times when they came up short once for 3 months running, with a story about a freelance contract that fell through and checks that were delayed. I had given them money for a vacation the previous spring, handed it over in cash like it was nothing, because my son said they needed a break and looked tired when he said it. I had given, and told myself that a man who can help his family should help his family. And I had never once sat down and added up the total. The Tuesday morning phone call made me sit down and add up the total. After I hung up with my daughter-in-law, I did not call my son. I did not call her back. I sat on that back porch until the coffee was cold, and the neighbor's dog had given up and gone inside. And I thought about everything that had happened over the past few years, with the particular clarity that comes when shock burns off the fog you didn't know was there. Then I went inside, opened my laptop, and started going through my bank records. I am not a man who checks his statements every month. I trusted the people around me. I trusted my son. What I found, as I scrolled back through 18 months of transactions, was a pattern I recognized from my business life. The slow, incremental kind of drain that doesn't look like anything on any given day, but adds up to something catastrophic when you finally see it whole. There were charges I hadn't authorized on a card I'd given my son for emergencies. Restaurant bills, a weekend at a hotel 2 states away, a furniture delivery, a subscription service I had never heard of, none of them enormous on their own. Together, they came to just under $11,000. I sat there, looking at the number, for a long time. I called Gerald. Gerald is 2 years older than me, and has been my closest friend since before I can remember. He is also a retired attorney, which has been useful more than once. I told him everything: the phone call, the secret wedding, the credit card charges, the loan, the rent I'd been covering, all of it. He was quiet for a while when I finished. Then he said, "How long have you been watching this and telling yourself it was fine?" I didn't have a good answer for that. "Don't do anything yet," Gerald said. "Don't call your son. Don't change anything. Give me a couple of days." I agreed. And I kept my word, mostly. I did not call my son. I did not confront my daughter-in-law about the honeymoon deposit she was apparently expecting me to pay for a wedding I had not been invited to attend. I went about my days quietly, carefully, the way I used to move around a job site when I was trying to get a full picture of something before I committed to fixing it. On the 3rd day, Gerald called me back. He had done some checking. What he told me took me a few minutes to fully absorb. My daughter-in-law, it turned out, had spent the past several months consulting with an attorney of her own, not about the wedding, or about estate planning, or about anything a reasonable person in her position might need a lawyer for. She had been asking questions about conservatorship, about the legal process by which a family member can petition to take control of an elderly relative's finances and assets on the grounds that the relative is no longer capable of managing them independently. She was 31 years old. She had known me for less than 2 years, and she had been quietly exploring what it would take to have me declared mentally unfit. Gerald told me this in a calm, measured voice, the way he delivers bad news evenly, without flinching, because he knows I need the information straight. When he finished, I thanked him and put the phone down. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink for a while. I thought about my son. I thought about whether he knew. I thought about the car and the rent and the $11,000 and the vacation money and the wedding I had not been invited to, and my new daughter-in-law calling me 4 days after that wedding to ask about a honeymoon deposit before I'd even been told there was a marriage. I thought about all the years I had spent working and all the things I had built and all the times I had said yes when the answer should have been no. I thought about my wife and what she would say if she could see any of this. I made some phone calls that afternoon. My accountant, my own attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled my business affairs for 15 years and who listened to everything I told her without interrupting. A property management company I had done business with before and trusted. By the time I went to bed that night, I had set several things in motion. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, my son called me. His voice had the particular texture it gets when he wants something warmer than usual. Slightly careful, like a man walking on ice he isn't sure will hold. He asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. He said he had some news to share, that things had moved quickly, that he hoped I'd understand. He told me he'd gotten married. I let him finish. "Congratulations," I said. He seemed surprised that I didn't say more. He started to explain they'd wanted something intimate, just a small gathering. They hadn't wanted to make a big production of it. They were going to have a real celebration later that everyone could come to. I listened to all of it. I noticed he never said he was sorry. I noticed he never explained why I specifically had not been there. I noticed the word intimate getting used to describe what I later found out had been a 170-person ceremony at a venue that charged by the head. When he was done, I said, "I'm sure you'll be very happy together." Another pause. He said, "About the honeymoon she mentioned she called you. I just want you to know, we're not trying to pressure you. It's just the timing with the deposit." "Don't worry about the deposit," I said. I heard him exhale. "Great, Dad. I really appreciate. Don't worry about it because I'm not paying it," I said. "I won't be covering the honeymoon. Or the rent. Going forward. I've arranged for a property management company to take over the building, and they'll be reaching out about the new lease terms. Market rate, first and last month required. I wanted to tell you myself before you heard from them." The silence that followed was very long. "Dad, I love you," I said. "I will always love you. But I'm done." I hung up. What came after that was not quiet. My son called back 6 times that afternoon. My daughter-in-law called twice. And when I didn't answer, she sent me a series of text messages that started reasonably and got progressively less so. My son came to the building that evening. I could see him on the exterior camera I'd had installed 2 weeks earlier, standing in the parking lot, looking up at the windows. He didn't buzz up. I think some part of him understood that it would not go the way he wanted. 3 days later, I received a letter from my daughter-in-law's attorney. It was a formal inquiry about my cognitive state and referenced concerns about my decision-making capacity. It cited my recent erratic financial behavior as evidence of possible decline. The erratic financial behavior they were referring to was me stopping the payments. I forwarded the letter to Patricia. She drafted a response within 48 hours that I am told was thorough and pointed. I am also told that the inquiry did not proceed further after that. My son came to see me in person about 2 weeks after all of this began. He came alone, which I took as a meaningful sign either he'd chosen to come without his wife or she'd let him come alone. And either way, it said something about where things stood between them. He looked tired. He looked young. In the way that adults sometimes suddenly look young when the support structures they've been leaning on without realizing it are no longer there. We sat at the kitchen table where he used to do his homework as a boy. He told me his wife was angry. He told me they were struggling with the new rent. He told me he'd started applying for jobs, which was the most hopeful thing I had heard in years, and I told him so. He asked me if I would reconsider. Cross. Con guy. I told him that what I was reconsidering was everything, not reversing it, but reconsidering the whole long history of how I had raised him and what I had enabled and what I owed it to both of us to change. I told him that I should have said no more often when he was young. I told him I was not going to keep paying for a life he was capable of building himself, and that the kindest thing I could do for him now was to stop pretending otherwise. I told him that if he ever needed me, actually needed me, in the way that people need each other in real emergencies, I would be there. He didn't say much after that. But he didn't leave right away either. We sat there for a while in the kitchen, and I made more coffee. And at some point, he started talking about a job application he'd sent to a logistics company. and I asked him questions about it, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like a conversation rather than a transaction. I don't know what happened with his marriage after that. I know they stayed in the apartment through the end of the following month, and then they left. The property management company confirmed the unit was returned in acceptable condition, which I was relieved about. I heard secondhand, through a mutual family friend, that my daughter-in-law had gone back to stay with her parents for a while. I don't know what that means for their marriage, and it is not my place to know. What I know is what happened to me. I sold 2 of my rental properties that spring, not because I had to, but because I'd been meaning to simplify for years, and this felt like the right moment to do it. I took the proceeds and moved into a smaller place, a house with a good porch and a yard that doesn't take all weekend to maintain. Gerald and I did the fishing trip we'd been planning. We stayed out there for 8 days and came back looking, according to Gerald's wife, like we'd fallen off the back of a truck, which we took as a compliment. I talk to my son most weeks now. He got the logistics job. He's been there 7 months. He and his wife are still together, as far as I know, though I don't ask directly and he doesn't volunteer much. That's a thing I've had to make my peace with. I cannot know everything, and I cannot fix everything. And I was wrong to spend so many years believing I could. What I should have done 30 years ago was teach my son that the world doesn't bend for anyone, that the people who end up steadiest are the ones who learned early how to hold their own weight. I thought I was giving him a head start. I was giving him soft ground to stand on, and when I finally stopped, he had to learn at 33 what most people learn at 22. That's on me as much as it's on him, and I've sat with that honestly. But here's what I know for certain, and what I want to say clearly to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this story. There is a difference between supporting the people you love and funding the belief that they don't need to grow. I confused those two things for decades. I called it generosity. I called it love. Sometimes it was, but sometimes it was just fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of being needed less. Fear of becoming one of those fathers who seemed cold and withholding, and nothing like the father I wanted to be. It took a Tuesday morning phone call from a woman I barely knew, asking me to pay for a honeymoon she'd neglected to mention, to finally make me afraid of the right thing. I was 62 years old when all of this happened. I am 63 now. I own fewer properties and have fewer obligations, and wake up every morning without the weight of someone else's life pressing down on my chest. The porch at the new house faces east, which means I get the full morning light, and I sit out there with my coffee most days and do not wait for my phone to ring. Some mornings it does, and when it's my son, I pick it up, and we talk. And it sounds a little more each time, like 2 adults who know who they are and what they're responsible for. That's the best outcome I could have hoped for. It turns out it was available to me the whole time. I just had to stop paying to avoid it.